Today on the Starting Over Stronger show, we are going to be talking with Ryan Kalamaya. He is a Colorado family law attorney, and he has a lot of expertise in working with couples for whom one of which is a business owner. So if you or your spouse or soon-to-be ex are business owners or self-employed, this is going to be an episode that you do not want to miss. Ryan is going to break down all of the unique nuances that you are going to face if that is your situation, and hopefully answer a lot of questions and, quell a lot of fears that you have about that situation so that you know a little bit more what that's going to look like as you go into it. And certainly if you have questions even after this episode, you will be able to reach out to me and or Ryan and get those questions answered, having learned a lot here today. So stay tuned.
Welcome to the Starting Over Stronger show, where you'll find help and hope for your divorce survival and recovery. Divorce well, live well.
Welcome back to the show. Thanks again for joining us here at Starting Over Stronger, Divorce Survival and Recovery. We talk about this all the time. Life is full of peaks and valleys. And today we are going to talk with somebody from the home of the peaks and valleys, Colorado family law attorney Ryan Kalamaya. Thank you for being here, Ryan.
Thanks for having me, Annie. Looking forward to chatting with you.
Yeah. And today we are going to talk about business ownership in divorce and the unique nuances that go along with that. Ryan and his team meet people when they are suffering in the emotional valley of divorce, facing the prospect of climbing their own Mount Everest. And he helps them to sort through their baggage, help them plan their journey, and guide them to the summit. And all of that sounds really good. I actually just came from Colorado, so I am super excited to have this conversation with you. And I am glad to say that Ryan also is the managing partner of Kalamaya Gosha, an innovative and ambitious law firm that pushes the boundaries to discover new frontiers in family law, personal injury, and criminal defense in Colorado, and also the co-host of another podcast called Divorce at Altitude, which is a podcast on Colorado family law. So for listeners who are in Colorado, you'll want to check that out. Ryan specializes in divorces that involve complex property valuations, including closely held businesses, family partnerships, and trust interests, parental relocation, or high conflict custody disputes. And he was named to the Rising Stars list by Super Lawyers for 5 years before being selected to Super Lawyers for 2022. He has a 10 out of 10 rating by AVO, where there are over 80 client reviews and testimonials. So I think it's safe to say he knows what he's talking about here today. And so welcome to the show again, Ryan. Thanks so much. Tell us a little bit about who Ryan is and how you got to be an expert on business ownership and divorce.
Well, thanks again for having me on, Annie. And I was originally born and raised in Colorado and then went out east to play baseball at the University of Virginia. I thought that I was going to be a professional baseball player. I actually got recruited near you for the University of Kansas, but I came back home after college once I realized that I was a good college baseball player, but a mediocre baseball player overall. So I wasn't going to be playing in the big leagues. And the closest thing to what I had experienced on the athletic field was being in the courtroom. My dad was a trial lawyer. Again, I thought that it was going to be the last thing I would be doing is following in my dad's footsteps. And so I ended up coming back home to Colorado for law school and made my way up to the mountains. The way I got into divorce work was by happenstance. I joined a firm after being a prosecutor for a couple years, and the mentor that I had was a divorce lawyer, and the family law aspect really appealed to me because I got to work with individuals in their kind of most difficult vulnerable situations. And the business valuation or business interests was something that I really latched onto. I really enjoy learning how people make lives and make their income, and every business is unique, and every case is unique. Every client situation, everyone's story is unique. There's general trends, as you and I both know, with divorce and a relationship falling apart, but there are issues in a business that I'm always learning, and that's how I really got into the valuation aspects of divorce.
Okay, very good. Well, business ownership is a big topic regardless. So if you add to that divorce, which is also its own very big topic, there's probably a lot for us to talk about today. And certainly I don't expect that in the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to cover every single detail that would be important to every single person, but we're going to try to hit the highlights of the importance of protecting a small business before, during, and after a divorce, and what that looks like exactly. So what would you say are the main issues for business owners who are divorcing?
Well, so it depends on if you are the business owner or you're the spouse of a business owner. There are certainly cases, situations where owners, they can be co-owners. But for the business owner, there are some general issues or problems that we frequently see. Mm-hmm. And I guess the first thing we need to do is to take a step back and really define what we're talking about. And for private businesses, that's going to be different than Apple or Microsoft. Those are publicly traded companies. So we know each and every day when you and I are talking during this episode, the share price of Tesla or Apple is going up and down. And the concept is not really that much different for a private business, but it's to get how much is that business worth. But a private business, you can talk about private partnerships, LLCs, corporations. There are different business structures. They can matter for valuation purposes, but really when we're talking about business values in a divorce, you're often talking about expert witnesses. And those are the things that business owners, they typically don't have that much familiarity with those because, they could be a family business that was passed down from their parents or has been in the family for quite some time. Or it could be something that they had just been working at and they didn't really think much about selling their business. It really depends on the kind of business and the issues that are involved. And like I said at the very beginning, it depends on if you're talking about the business owner or their spouse.
Right. That makes sense. And, I could think that it's probably safe to say that in the listenership of this show, we might have both. Someone who is a business owner and someone who's married to a business owner. And so, just for sake of making it as clear as possible, we probably should just talk about one or the other. And then maybe at some point we'll kind of add the other in case there's other interests there. But I know that you often, when you talk about this topic in general, you kind of take a strategy of taking a specific person or an avatar, if you will, and talking about this person. So the name that you gave me is Melanie Wolfe. So tell me, who is Melanie Wolfe and what is going on in her life?
So Melanie Wolfe was a hypothetical character that we created within our firm. And it's helpful when you really sit down and write out a story. And human beings, we tell stories. I mean, lawyers, we are kind of failed writers or novelists, but ultimately people, they latch on to stories. And so to tell someone's story, it resonates with them and it helps understand or helps people understand the concepts involved. So Melanie Wolfe is our hypothetical divorce client. She gets in a car, she looks over and she sees a bag of fast food that Eric, her husband, left, and it just triggers her because they have had arguments about the convenience and the value of fresh foods and those issues that we commonly see, the differences between maybe men and women and men or husbands and wives or fathers and mothers about the values. And Eric has borrowed Melanie's car and he's short on time, so he just gives the kids some fast food, and it triggers her and takes her down a path of emotional kind of reconsideration and self-examination. And so Melanie drives to the counselor's office ruminating about what this event has done to her, and then she enters the counselor's office where she's going to marriage counseling, and Eric walks in and announces that he has hired a divorce lawyer. Now, Eric is the business owner, and Melanie has always relied on him for the financial component of their marriage, and that was his deal. And so she feels immediately vulnerable because she doesn't know what he has. She doesn't know how to manage her finances because she's never done that, and she's really focused on the children. So she's wondering to herself, how am I going to survive? Are we going to have enough money to continue the life that we had, even though we're going to separate and go through a divorce? And so Melanie Wolfe's concerns are very common for the wife of a business owner, where she's worried about him spending a lot of time away from the house. Oftentimes what we see is when that foundation, the relationship starts eroding, the business owner starts spending more and more time at the office, or they could be just kind of out of it and doing other things, which could result in the divorce process. But really, the control aspect is a key feature in a divorce involving a business owner. So Melanie feels like she's out of, she doesn't have control of the process. She doesn't know what Eric's been doing with the money. And that is a frequent issue that we see in divorces involving business owners.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so one of the things that you've mentioned a couple of different times is about a private business. So I guess maybe at this point, could you define for us what a private business is and how that might become a part of this issue?
So private business is going to be any business where there is not a public ownership or market for it. So Apple is going to be different than that retail store, whether it be in Kansas City or Denver or Houston, where someone comes in and they need to get their iPhone fixed. We all have seen those businesses walking around, and if that's just a little storefront, that's a private business. Now, there are 3 valuation approaches that are typically used in divorce across the country. And oftentimes it's going to rely on expert witnesses. They're frequently CPAs, and they're going to go in and they're going to look at business and they're going to decide what approach that is. Those 3 approaches are going to be market. So that is similar to the public market, the stock exchange, the Tesla, the Apple, but there are certain markets that these experts are aware of. So a restaurant or an estate planning law firm or even a CPA, those kinds of businesses are frequently traded, and there are these databases of how those companies are valued. So something like a landscape business, there could be a particular metric. So they sell for 2x EBITDA, and the valuation experts kind of know about how those are handled. Frequently we see restaurants and it'll be under new management or new ownership. And restaurants, they can oftentimes be sold. And so that is something where a market approach might be appropriate. Another way to value a business is based on the assets. And that would be, the easiest example would be, an owner, Eric Wolfe, where he owns a building or a particular piece of real estate, and the business itself is the real estate. And that, where the business in and of itself is based on what it owns. The final approach, which is actually the most common in divorces, is the income approach. And that's, how much does that business generate? So if we go to the iPhone repair store that we were talking about earlier, it would be, how much does that store or that company earn? And then when you get into the income approach, you're getting into different issues of what are appropriate deductions, because Eric Wolfe could be, I've seen it where Eric has his girlfriend's lingerie and he's expensing that to the business and taking a deduction for that. And, that would be added back by an expert witness in terms of the income and matter as to what the deductions are or not, because it matters for income.
Right. Okay. Where does it come into play where you look at a couple who maybe the business might on paper be owned by one spouse, but both are working in it and always have, worked full time in the business? How do you determine a valuation for that? Or is it a valuation that you're even looking for?
Well, I think it depends. I've certainly seen cases where the husband is the CEO and then the wife is the CFO. There's certainly situations where that is flip-flopped, but frequently in these small businesses, they need someone to handle the finances. And that's usually the first kind of employee that often businesses will bring in. They'll bring in the bookkeeper. And, I can speak from experience. I mean, my wife for a period of time was a bookkeeper for my law firm or helped out with the books. And it's one of those kind of part-time gigs. And as a business grows, the couple can frequently grow with that. But if the wife or the non-business owner is an employee, then what would happen, what we frequently see is we want to give notice. If Melanie Wolfe is working with Eric, then Melanie is, often going to leave the business. Now, Melanie is incentivized to make sure that the business maintains its value because it's a marital asset in most states. And so she wants to maximize. She wants Eric to do well. She wants the business to do well, even though they might be having some significant disagreements, emotional disagreements. And that's one of the roles of someone like you, Annie, like a divorce coach or a divorce lawyer comes in and says, listen, you shouldn't be cutting off your nose to spite yourself. But what often we will do is give notice, and then the non-business owner will leave the business. But for valuation purposes, what happens is both spouses, they have to be normalized, or their compensation, it would be reasonable compensation. Because when you value a business, you have to assume that the owner or the non-business owner employee, that they are being compensated as a normal person. So you're looking at what a hypothetical willing and able buyer would pay for the business. And so if I'm the business owner, then I might be taking deductions, or I might be paying myself something different than what someone that would be buying my business would be willing to pay. So these valuation experts, the CPAs, will oftentimes do what's called reasonable compensation. And that's one of the fighting or one of the points of disagreement oftentimes in these business valuations, because the more that a business owner's compensation is, the less the business is worth, because there's less profit. And so there's different incentives for people to pay their spouses or themselves in a business. And so frequently we see that, but there's going to be a plan to unwind, just like, frequently we see people owning joint checking accounts. Eventually they're going to have their own checking accounts. It's just a matter of how do you unwind that in a divorce. It's a lot more complicated, especially when emotions are involved, because oftentimes that is for lack of a better term, their baby. And oftentimes the small business is the most valuable asset or piece of property in a divorce.
Yeah, I could see that. And, especially if so I'm thinking of a specific situation where there was a medical practice involved, and the wife was, I don't know if she would have been considered a CFO or a bookkeeper or office manager, probably more likely. But her and her spouse just enjoyed the profits of the business until the divorce came along. And then, the decision that has to be made at that point is, can we continue to work together? And I'm going to guess that in most situations, that's not going to be advisable. Maybe during the divorce, if need be, but probably not going forward. And although there certainly are probably exceptions to that where they're able to continue to work together, but if they don't, and whenever that decision decision is made, then some amount of determination has to be made as to what salary she would have earned if she were earning one. And, if she has, even if she has a business degree and she can go get another job, there's still a gap for her, trying to make that transition, and how does that look? And so I'm sure that's a big part of it too. When you look at the business valuation, it's not just the value of the business as much, or it is also, in addition to that, a valuation of her value and her role in that business and what that's going to look like going forward, whether or not she's going to stay in that role, right?
Right. And oftentimes those situations where Melanie, if she's the bookkeeper, she's going to have more information about whether the deductions or the expenses, how clean are the books? And Melanie, in that situation, she might be comfortable knowing how much she thinks the business is worth, for example. But also if we get a valuation expert, she might be trusting of the books because she's in control of that. If, on the other hand, Melanie, in my firm's hypothetical situation, she's not involved in the business. And so she doesn't know how aggressive, if not illegal, Eric is running that business. And so that's going to determine how she's going to select her divorce lawyer, how she's going to approach the valuation aspect, because there's a thing called forensic accounting. And that is where a CPA or a forensic accountant, they go in and they look at, is there cash being pulled out? Is there any funny business? Because most valuation experts, their opinion is only as good as the information that they're provided. And they're not going to dig into the books. They're just going to get the books and they're going to look at and they're going to say, is this a business that's growing? Is it shrinking? And, they're going to rely on the information provided to them. So it really depends on how much information they have and how they approach that particular situation.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, earlier I asked you about what are the main issues for business owners. The way I see it from my experiences, it tends to be, there's a couple of different things going on during the divorce, the management or operation or control of the business during, as well as the income distribution from the business during the divorce. But then there's also obviously I think the thing that most of our minds go to immediately, which is the division of the business at the end of the divorce. Or is there anything else that's important here to consider? Or are those the three main topics that you're also usually dealing with?
No, I think it depends. If Melanie, she frequently will understand, but Eric will have the hardest time. One of the first questions that Eric will ask me is, what's going to happen to my business? And he thinks, is the court just going to divide my business? How can you do that? What are we doing? And so oftentimes we work in hypotheticals and we'll say, listen, Eric, if the business is worth $5 million, then we're not going to be splitting that in half. You're going to be having to buy her out of the business and essentially giving her $2.5 million if you're looking at an equal division of property. And, I know that there's going to be a difference across the country in terms of or equitable division versus community property, but there is oftentimes an argument about the assets that Melanie's going to get, the house. And I know, you do real estate and you talk about that. And, frequently we see issues where Eric is going to walk away from the divorce where all he has is his business. And he gets frustrated because he then will be getting the business, and then based on his income from the business, he'll be paying maintenance or alimony and child support. And there's this argument about double dipping, and frequently that causes a lot of anger. And so dealing with those emotional issues in a divorce, whether it's Eric or Melanie, is something that comes up. You asked me about other issues that we see with business owners. Is typically there is what I call divorce flu, where Eric will realize that he's going to get the business and he knows that it's $5 million or something, that is a very profitable business. And then all of a sudden, he'll start, and, we're recording this in the age of COVID. And so all of a sudden he'll start feeling sick, or the economy starts feeling sick, and his business there are all these risks. And, I've seen it where one week Eric is talking about how his company is going to the moon. He's spending money like it grows on trees. And then the next week we don't have any money. And so parsing that out and helping someone like Melanie understand, is this legitimate? Were there things that Eric was hiding during the marriage because he was just trying to keep it go, and there was a lot of stress and pressure to maintain their lifestyle? Was he borrowing money, and was he hiding something? And was it to preserve the marriage or to save the marriage? Or is it legitimate? Or is he just saying this because he's worried about some significant payout that he's going to be paying for Melanie? So really helping people understand what's truth versus fiction. That's where, a divorce coach and an attorney, they work together to try to figure out, and also a valuation expert. Oftentimes Melanie, if I'm representing Melanie, I'm going to bring in a consulting expert or a shadow expert, someone to make sure that Melanie knows that she has someone in her corner. And it's really kind of developing that team, and that team. And because Eric will often go to Melanie directly and say, why are we paying all these lawyers? And why are we paying all these, why do you have a divorce coach? Why do you have all these people involved, in trying to decide whether, again, what's fact and what's fiction. But his concern, Eric's concern, and everyone's concern is going to be that there could be a lack of liquidity, in that if he doesn't have $5 million or $2.5 million in cash, and Eric has to buy Melanie out of that business, then there's some risks on both sides. Because if he has to sign a promissory note to say, here's a paper IOU, I'm going to pay you, I don't have the money in the bank, and the real estate and the other holdings that they have is insufficient, then oftentimes divorce lawyers are going to create what's called a promissory note. And it's essentially an IOU. And there can be some big issues with that, because then Eric has to maintain the cash flow for his business at the same time as paying Melanie. And frequently what we'll hear is Eric will say, you're killing the business, or you're trying to kill the business. And that is not what Melanie wants, or what Melanie should want. And so those are some of the issues that we frequently see when we're valuing businesses or dealing with private businesses in a divorce across the country.
And this payout, this promissory note, I guess buyout, I don't know exactly what the terminology would be, but this is going to be separate from any alimony or maintenance award that's given, or is it ever that buyout is a part of a payment that is promised through alimony or maintenance support?
Well, that's a good question. I frequently what we would do before 2018, when the law changed on taxability, is that we would, there would be potentially a win-win, where the business owner, Eric, would pay Melanie, and we would essentially have an alimony payment. It would be a property payment, so buying her out of the business, but we would paper it up as an alimony payment. And the reason that we would do that is because if Eric was going to pay Melanie, let's say $10,000 a month, it used to be that was deductible to Eric. And so he would be able to write that off. So his out of pocket after tax payment is really more like $8,000 because he got the write-off. And then Melanie, she would get $10,000, and because she would, presumably she didn't have a job, or her income was lower and she was in a lower tax bracket. So what would happen is Melanie's net, or her income from the $10,000, would be $9,000 a month. And so there's a $1,000 difference there, where Eric is paying $8,000 and Melanie's receiving $9,000, and that went away. And so we can't do that anymore. And so really what we're dealing with across the country, but here in Colorado, and most states follow this framework, is that we're going to first divide property, and then we're going to see what the property division is, and then we're going to factor in child support and maintenance. So if there's a significant promissory note, it depends on if there's interest, and because the interest is usually characterized as taxable income, and we can get, as you can tell, we can get really far in the weeds on this, but the reality is that if Eric signs an agreement and he agrees to pay Melanie $10,000 a month to buy her out of the business over 10 years, he has $10,000 a month less to pay her for alimony and maintenance. So, or alimony and child support. So it really depends. And it depends. If I represent Eric, then I'm going to try to make that property payment, generally speaking, as high as possible, because then that's going to reduce the amount of what's called net spendable income to pay alimony. And at least here in Colorado, and most states are going to follow this, is they're going to look at what Eric's income is from the business, and then they're going to have to take into consideration, he's got to pay health insurance, he's got to pay taxes, and then if he has to sign a promissory note, then that is something that's going to be considered. But it really is going to be it's kind of a sausage making process, and divorce lawyers can really get into what's going to be the best for Eric and for Melanie. And really, it's working together because Melanie wants Eric to do well, or she should, because if there's a promissory payment, she wants to get paid back on that. And if the business fails, then she's going to be left high and dry. Same thing with future maintenance and alimony, as well as child support. I mean, Melanie should want Eric to do well. So she can't go and ask for too much or get too much, because if she does kill the business, then she's going to be left holding, an empty bag, and that's not a good situation for either Eric or Melanie.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are you getting the support you need as you divorce or face the possibility of divorce? Did you know that for just $55 a month, you can be a part of a 1-hour weekly support group call of people just like you? Some haven't even filed yet, but they know the marriage is not sustainable or healthy. Some were served papers they didn't want. Others are feeling empowered that they finally took the reins of their life and hired an attorney and a divorce coach to help them navigate the uncertain waters of divorce. All of them are facing fear, grief, loss, confusion, and pain, and they're finding help and hope in a Starting Over Stronger support group. You can get registered today for a group at startingoverstronger.com/groups and start this week in getting the help you need to divorce well and then live well. Remember, divorce is hard. Life after doesn't have to be, but the support you get now is what makes the difference.
Speaking of divorce attorneys, I can't think of any situations really that I'm involved in anyway, where it's advisable to proceed without an attorney in place. But certainly if either party is self-employed, even on a part-time basis, I'm sure that it's even that much more important. So when would you say that someone should retain an attorney if this is the situation that they're facing? They feel like a divorce is coming, either that they're considering filing or that they have the idea that their spouse is, maybe they've talked about it, and they know there's a business involved. When is it the right time to get an attorney involved?
Well, I think it's a balancing act between the emotional, how ready are you, and versus preserving your rights. Certainly I've seen situations where a business owner, Eric Wolfe, goes to a divorce lawyer and starts doing a significant amount of planning. And when he hired someone like me can matter, because if he hires me in 2019 and then all of a sudden the business starts cratering, and then in 2021 or 2022 it just keeps on going down and down, then there's an argument that this this is all divorce planning. And so there's certainly some trade-offs, but on the other end, as you said, having a divorce lawyer that knows what issues are involved, and really advising someone like Melanie. I have a case right now where long-term marriage, and she had no idea how much money they were making. He would chastise her for buying a Starbucks, and they lived, a fairly Spartan lifestyle. And then she consulted with me and she sent me the tax returns, and they were making $4 million a year. And she had absolutely no idea. And he kept on going to her and just saying, "What's your number? What's your number?" Because he was trying to prevent her from really digging in and understanding that she was entitled to a lot more money than their lifestyle and anyone had ever kind of clued her in on. And so that was it's been a learning experience for her. And so it really depends on when you're ready. But, a lot of valuation experts, they will look to see who filed. Most states are no fault divorce. I believe Missouri and at least in Colorado. And so, but when you have a business owner who files first, that oftentimes will kind of raise some red flags, because then it opens up the issue of, is there divorce planning? In the situation that I just referenced, where the wife, she was the one that filed, the business owner, the husband, he didn't want the divorce. And so oftentimes it's less likely that he's going to be the one that's cooking the books or really, torpedoing the business, because he's just in denial that a divorce is even going to be on the horizon. So I think it really depends, and it depends on if it's a Melanie situation or an Eric situation. I wouldn't ever say that it's too early. It's just a matter of what are the issues involved and how ready is someone. But certainly someone like Melanie, she needs to consult with someone before they get too far down the line, because Annie, I'm sure where people, before they get a divorce, they will often start talking about numbers, and they will often talk about expectations, and those expectations can be enduring. So if someone says, I'm going to take care of you, or someone says a particular number, they remember that, and it's really hard, even if it's completely out of left field, or it's not even a reasonable number, to get someone off of that, because we had that conversation around the kitchen table and you told me that you would give me X. That's really difficult to deal with from both an emotional standpoint and a legal standpoint.
Yeah. Yeah, after a 22-year marriage and hearing all of those exact same words, I can relate to exactly what you're saying. And certainly now we're kind of entering into the control and personality issues that come up both for Eric and Melanie and any small business owner in divorce. What are your thoughts on how that plays into this?
Annie, the characteristics that make Eric a great business owner are also often the character flaws that cause divorce. And when someone like Melanie has been under the thumb of Eric, or has had this control, and there could be some codependency, there can be some narcissism, there can be a lot of personality disorders that are involved on both sides, and substance abuse, all of that. When you are dealing with a successful business owner. I mean, listen, like, I'm a business owner, and I like to think of myself as normal. I'm a divorce lawyer, but I am a human being. But everyone thinks that they're normal, but oftentimes the characteristics that really result in something worth fighting over are also the same characteristics that either will cause a lot of disputes, but they can also be something that you really have to take time to unwind. And having a divorce coach, and having a valuation expert, and having a lawyer that understands those dynamics, and it really, I think, plays into, I know that one of the things that you deal with is selecting your divorce lawyer. That personality is going to matter, because if the business owner, they're experience oftentimes with negotiations. And this is going to be one of their first negotiations where they are stuck with the other party, right? Where, you and I, if we go into iPhone repair store and we don't like the price, we can walk out. Well, Eric and Melanie are stuck in their negotiation. And that is something that Eric will really struggle with to understand because he is stuck in that negotiation. And Melanie is, for the first time, really asserting her independence. And that might be different than the dynamics that were involved in the marriage and can really cause some difficult conversations, and it takes some time because that control, he doesn't have control, and he might be a control freak, and he's going to do things to try to regain that control.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say you're right. Definitely personalities are a huge part of what drives the conflict in divorce. And a lot of that is the parties, the husband and the wife, but sometimes it is also the attorneys. I think you have to be really cautious about what it is that you feel like you're looking for when you're hiring an attorney, and are you using the right criteria? All joking aside, I mean, if you're attracted to narcissists, you might go looking for one in a divorce attorney too, and that just might be really attractive to you, that kind of personality. And so you want to be really cautious about what criteria you're using to select an attorney, because their personality is going to be another factor in everything that unfolds from this point forward. You mentioned community property and equitable distribution. Which one is Colorado?
Colorado's an equitable distribution state.
Okay.
So what that means is that we are not a 50-50 state. So we're going to take into consideration, the judges are going to take into consideration the what the value is, and also look at what the contributions were. And in Colorado, it's specifically under 1410-113, which is the statute on property in Colorado, the contributions of a homemaker or a parent. And, there's this guilt, or again, it goes back to the control issue of, I made this business successful, but Eric also, if we're kind of using stereotypes, he wasn't able to go to work each and every day and spend those long hours if it weren't for Melanie taking care of the kids. And so, being there when he comes home and says, I had a horrible day, and she emotionally supports him, notwithstanding our previous discussion about Melanie might actually be contributing, financially, or, in sweat equity, or really working in the business. Yeah. So, but what we can look at is the contributions of each spouse. It's really tricky when you start getting into separate versus marital property. Most states across the country, when someone owns something, when they get married, that's generally considered separate property. But how much is a private business when Eric and Melanie get married 10 years ago versus now? And you're looking at retroactive appraisal of how much was the business back in 2000 versus what it's worth in 2022. That is really a challenge. And so you kind of go through those various issues, but the equitable distribution, you can also have arguments about whether or not Eric should get 60% of the marital estate. Did he contribute to that business, that $5 million business, and really was it something that he did? We had a case here in Colorado where our client was a female business owner, and she bought the business very soon before the divorce filing. The divorce took forever. It took like 2-3 years. But in that time, she really grew the business. And so what they were arguing about was that increase in value. And the judge, who happens also to be a female, said, listen, you this was you, and it was during the divorce, and there are different states and how they value property, whether it be when you file for divorce or at the divorce trial or wherever it is. And here in Colorado, that's all, it's when you value that you value property at the end, at the trial. And so the judge said, listen, this was your contributions, and you did it essentially essentially on your own because you were taking care of the kids and you were growing this business. And so she ended up awarding 70% to our client. And that's a pretty rare circumstance, but that's one issue that you do see sometimes in divorces involving small business owners.
Awesome. Well, the only other thing that I have on the agenda today to talk about is something that I don't know that it comes into play that often because I mean, I want you to tell me what, your experience is, but how much does prenuptial agreements and postnuptial agreements come into play with business ownership?
I would say that the family money with trusts is second to when someone owns a business, because of that valuation. The issue that I just addressed or just kind of talked about when Eric and Melanie, if they get married in 2000 and Eric owns a business, figuring out how much that business is worth is a real challenge unless there's a premarital agreement. Yeah. And so oftentimes business owners, we see in our practice, people will come to us and they'll say, listen, I want to get a business or I want to get a premarital agreement. My partner and I have done several podcast episodes on prenups, and they're becoming more and more common, especially with millennials, because millennials have seen their parents go through a divorce. They're a little bit more realistic about what they are looking at in terms of getting married. And then we're also recording this during the Great Resignation. And, the statistics are that a lot of people leaving their jobs are starting new businesses. And so those are great ways or I hesitate to say great ways, but those are real issues that can be addressed in a premarital agreement. And obviously you can deal with premarital agreements and businesses. Do you give a particular amount over a particular time? Is the business off the table? Is it, listen, and there's different ways that you can contract around that. And it's not going to differ, at least here in Colorado, between whether it's a premarital agreement or a postnuptial agreement. Most states are going to look favorably. Here in Colorado, there's kind of a boilerplate warning where both sides have to have a lawyer, but they can certainly save a lot of money and a lot of arguments if they do get a divorce when they address it up front in a premarital agreement.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, just my own take on it from the type of clients that I tend to work with are people that are longtime marriages, first marriages, probably, nobody gets married thinking they're going to get divorced. So probably wasn't a prenuptial agreement because nobody saw this coming, right? So I think that's just something to, I guess, heed it for future reference, if nothing else. But certainly, if possible, whether or not you own a business, you want to privately reach a divorce settlement directly with your spouse and use mediation if necessary, because this way you don't have to worry about all the state laws and whether it's an equitable distribution or community property and what's a judge going to do. You can literally do what you both can agree to do, that you find, agreeable to both of you. You've mentioned it. There's also, no fault divorces, which means that the ending of the marriage doesn't require that we make allegations or blame anyone. It just is what it is. And here's how we want to move forward. So this is definitely the way to go if at all possible. And so thankfully, most divorces do conclude this way and avoid going to trial. What thoughts do you have on that?
Well, I think that's a great point, Annie, and that I think both Eric and Melanie are really incentivized to settle their divorce if a business is involved. On Eric's side, he's really got to factor in how much time am I going to spend in my divorce and the emotional fallout because he's going to be distracted. I mean, I joke about divorce flu, but the reality is that divorce is all consuming for many people. It's stressful and you're not on top of your game if you're Eric, and that is something that can really matter. And so if he's going to pay Melanie to buy her out of the business, he's going to be able to get back on track quicker. And, Melanie, the same time, she's got to factor in how much do I want and what is this going to cost? Because if she needs Eric to take the kids, and he's a business owner and he has flexibility, he may or may not have more flexibility because he's a business owner. She needs to really think about, what is her life going to be like in 2 years and how she conducts her negotiation. For me, everyone comes in, they say, I want to win my divorce. No one goes into a marriage thinking they're going to get divorced. Likewise, very few people come into their divorce thinking, I want to go to trial. But people always ask, can I win my divorce? And, for me, there's no winning and losing. It's a matter of what is going to be fair. But really, if you were to ask me, what is winning for me? Winning for me is seeing my client in 2 to 3 years and they feel like they got a good deal, but they're also able to maintain some semblance of a relationship if that's what they want. And especially it's important if they're co-parents. And I've certainly seen people where they drown the other person, or they get such a great deal, and then 2 years later, they're not even speaking with one another. And that is, a lost opportunity. So I think it's a balancing act of figuring out what's fair versus, what, and there's certainly circumstances, I'm sure you see it, Annie, and your listeners can relate to this, where no matter what the amount, Eric is, it's just no turning back. Eric, they're not going to be good co-parents, and that, oftentimes there's some personality issues involved, but certainly I think both people need to figure out how do they want to conduct their divorce and, go through that process. Because Eric, he might have different understandings or expectations. And if he hires a lawyer that disabuses him of, what is going to happen, and having that emotional support that someone like you offers, I think is really critical to both Eric and Melanie in a hypothetical divorce.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point. What else do you feel like, in closing, that listeners with businesses need to know as they enter into divorce?
I think that how you want your life to be is critical for going through a divorce, where they're worried about having enough. Everyone's worried about having enough. I'm in Aspen, Colorado. I deal with divorces involving hundreds of millions of dollars at time. And even, someone that is dealing with that kind of money, they're always worried, is it enough? And, that is especially true when you own your own business, because there is so much risk involved. And one thing I ask my clients is, if I had a magic wand, I can't repair your marriage. I can't go back and fix infidelity or some sort of addiction, but what is it that you want? And I think for your listeners to really think about what is reasonable to expect, and it really depends. That $100 million divorce is going to have obviously a different outcome when, there's the business is failing, and really having someone help them understand the difference between fact and fiction, because it's a really difficult situation, and divorce is emotional. And when you add the complexity of the financials involved in a small business, it can really be overwhelming. And making sure that you've got that divorce team right on your side as you go through it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again for being here and sharing your thoughts and experiences with us, Ryan.
Thanks again, Annie. I really enjoyed the conversation, and thanks again for the opportunity.
Absolutely.
Listeners, I hope this informative conversation has been helpful on your journey today. If you are a business owner or you're married to one, if you have any additional questions for myself or for Ryan about this topic, would you reach out? You can email me at annie@startingoverstronger.com with any questions. Certainly, if you need a divorce coach, if you have questions about your real estate during divorce, or if you want to explore what your situation looks like with regard to business ownership, I can help you through that as well. And it is my pleasure to meet you here each Wednesday with a new survivor story or professional to explore all that is important to you as you divorce. I am so thankful for those of you who have taken the time to jump over to Facebook and follow the Starting Over Stronger page and join the Starting Over Stronger After Divorce group, where you can interact with others going through the same things you are. And I will meet you there, where we can talk about all of the things that we explore here on the show as well. You can also follow me on Instagram at SOS Divorce Coach Annie. And of course, here where you get your podcasts, it would be wonderful if you would take just a moment to leave a rating or a review, or to share this podcast with anyone you know that's going through a divorce or that might need this information. So thank you for joining me here today. It's a pleasure to provide this service to you and to get you the information that you need to divorce well so that you can then live well. And I hope that you are getting the support you need to decide, survive, and then learn to thrive through your divorce. So I'll see you again here next week for more help as you divorce and hope as you are starting over stronger.